Hi everyone, I'm Blas. I'm an artist. I currently live in Toronto, Canada, and I'm sitting in my studio right now at the University of Toronto in downtown Toronto. And I am preparing my installation for arebyte. It's kind of a large, immersive moving image installation driven by computational processes. And across my practice, I typically work with moving image computation, critical theory, performance, some fabrication, architecture, a lot of different things. I definitely went through a period, I went to film school. I found that a very frustrating experience. I disavowed that, moved into art and digital art. But, in my own way, I've come back to film and cinema through these moving image installations. And I think my experience of studying, as a director has definitely influenced the way I like to approach making artwork. Because, of course, one way that I work across all these disciplines is not alone. Yeah, I work with all these people to realize these larger scale projects. And, I find that incredibly rewarding. It's an element of film production that I absolutely loved when I was younger, what they bring to the project, because they often elevate it beyond what you imagined it was going to be to begin with. I do think it's really that path through film, digital art, and then I did a PhD in critical theory and philosophy. I think it's that journey through all of those topics and interests and disciplines that I have, where I feel like, now I'm in a place where I've been able to bring just all those interests and passions that I have into the work. As an artist, I'd really like to be engaged with the media of my time. Things have, profoundly, dramatically changed since I was in art school in the early to mid 2000s, and there is so much queer, feminist, trans, so much minoritarian work that is rooted in digital and computational media. So landscape looks fundamentally different now, which is absolutely wonderful and delightful. And of course, it just brings different sets of, kind of questions and issues around, I guess, the phase that we're in right now with the internet and its kind of relationship to all of that, and the abilities and possibilities and means people have to kind of communicate and express themselves through the various platforms. You had a moment where digital art, internet art, computational art, really went mainstream. And that's also obviously had a continued impact on the connections of this type of artistic practice with other, genres of work that have had more, I guess, pride of place within the art world proper. So, more and more, right, we're seeing just kind of straight up digital, computational, net-based work in kind of dominant mainstream art spaces that span the range of kind of minoritarian subjectivities. But at the same time, of course, there is like a sliding scale, I would say, and depending on what kind of computational work you're making, I think that that's not always welcome in some of those artistic, kind of mainstream artistic spaces. And I think for me, I probably fall somewhere in between, just because I have this dual interest in the computational, but also moving image. What you're currently looking at is what I'm going to talk about is material from the work I'm developing at arebyte. And maybe surprisingly, or not, I actually start most of these big projects by writing an installation script. And then really you kind of go scene by scene, where it's describing what's happening physically in the installation and with media. I make these because I need to be able to track the not only the progression of media, which would happen in a regular film script, but also how that media is interacting with different physical elements in the installation space, because I'm often working with screens in a more kind of architectural way. So that's kind of step one of my process. And then before I go any further, I thought it would be interesting for you to see the production credits for this work, which are still being put together, but I think gives you a sense of, I guess, the pre-production work where, as I'm writing this installation script, it's giving me a sense of the different people I need to bring on to the production team. I like for there to be an engineering challenge, with each new work. So there's like something new that's happening that I haven't done before. I hadn't really worked with a cast since I made my film Contra Internet Jubilee 2033 in 2017. But I worked with a series of performance artists and actors to perform Prophets of AI Gods, which, this artwork is about kind of burgeoning AI religiosity in the tech industry. I'd always wanted to work with singers and vocalists on a project. And I finally got to do this. And part of this work is having 4 different singers come in and perform these invocation songs. So we brought in some singers, and then you can see, if I kind of scroll through these credits, we have kind of an architecture person, machine learning engineers, there's computer graphics, video editing, motion capture, sound across musicians and sound designers. And, the list kind of goes on. And then there's like a whole set, as I kind of continue, of physical fabrication across, 3D printing to glass fabrication, et cetera. But just kind of gives you a sense of the scope of the people that I'm working with. After I have done the installation script, I'm ready to start modeling the installation. And I will sit down with an architect. This architect's name is Scott Kepford. I've been working with him since 2007, actually. And we will look at my drawings, kind of talk through everything, make adjustments. He will make suggestions. And then with Scott, I produce a 3D model. The red lighting is LED strips that are embedded in this floor that's been custom milled. There is this altarpiece in the center, and those kind of white letters on a red background are actually LED panels that will be playing video and symbols. And then in the center here, you have this crystal ball black sphere kind of thing that's actually going to be an LED sphere playing video. Just to kind of jump in and show you the LED sphere. So these were some early tests that were done. This is a bigger sphere than what we're working with, but you can see it's a screen that is a sphere. And this was an early test we were doing just to kind of get a sense of distortion. This is some of my content. And then if I scroll forward, you'll see, you can kind of see the pixel LED situation as you get closer. And this is the actual sphere that we're working with at arebyte. So I believe it's 1.2 meters in diameter. And this is it, getting assembled. Yeah, I mean, what I should say first is this is part 2 of a trilogy. The trilogy is called Silicon Traces. And Silicon Traces is really looking at beliefs, fantasies that are kind of driving Silicon Valley's visions of the future. So there was a prologue to this trilogy, which actually was the work I made at Gasworks in London that opened in the fall of 2017, called Contra Internet. And the centerpiece of that work was this film that I had just mentioned earlier called Contra Internet Jubilee 2033, which was in part a reimagining of scenes from the queer British filmmaker and artist Derek Jarman's 1978 film Jubilee. And this work was kind of setting the stage because it was a queer science fiction film. And where Jarman's film engages with the future of England, my film was much more about the future of the internet and was trying to give space to this desire for alternative networking infrastructure, something beyond the corporate internet as we know it. Narratively, the film takes up and deals with Ayn Rand. And again, Jarman dealt with the Queen of England. I wanted to kind of think of like a philosophical queen of Silicon Valley. And I think, Ayn Rand is absolutely appropriate for that. And so the film is really about looking at her philosophy of objectivism and basically how that had been taken up and championed by not only the right wing in the US, but also the tech industry. And this kind of celebration of this rogue individual, having a position against altruism, being extremely, pro-capitalist, like capitalism as a salvation of mankind. And In my film, Ayn Rand time travels to a future Silicon Valley that's being overthrown by queer militants. And I think that work, kind of set the stage for a lot of things for me. Moving forward, after this work, I was able to make the first main work in the trilogy, which is this work called The Doors, which, kind of got lost during COVID. But I'm really fond of this work. And this work moves into engaging with psychedelia. And it was very much looking at what I was seeing at the time in 2018, 19, when I was developing this, the kind of re-engineering of psychedelia in the San Francisco Bay Area. So, just this really fascinating confluence there of taking LSD and mushrooms and rebranding those as worker productivity drugs. And just thinking about this, different kind of brew of psychedelia that is emerging. And it was taking up the idea of the Doors from the 1960s psychedelic band, the Doors of Perception, and kind of using all of this to think about and explore, these histories of psychedelia in California, where we are now with them, and how the psychedelic project and this idea of the vision or the psychedelic trip has kind of been folded into, kind of like Silicon Valley's interest and obsession with futurism and predicting the future. Moving from psychedelia, I basically moved to religion, and I knew this was always going to be the second piece in this trilogy. Cultists, I'd been thinking about this idea of religiosity, spiritualism in Silicon Valley for a while. And again, there are writers that have been exploring this since the 90s, like someone like Eric Davis, for instance. But what really struck me was like a very silly, wacky example. When a former Google employee founded a church on a coming AI god called The Way of the Future. And I think, that it's easy to dismiss this example as like silly and wacky. But when this church, The Way of the Future, closed, to me, I took that as a kind of provocation that, maybe the church closed because these they achieved their mission, and the God exists, and the God is here now. But another way that I thought about that was there are already these kind of AI Silicon Valley gods amongst us that we worship and serve and offer ourselves up to, or are forced to offer ourselves up to in lots of different ways. So I wanted to make a work that, really settled into that dynamic and explored that dynamic and would make it palpable and experiential. So the work presents 4 AI gods that, I would say already exist. There are already systems of, ritual, belief, and worship attached to all of them. A framing of this work for me is John Dee's Holy Table. Not to go too deep into John Dee, but what I wanted to show you here is this image of this holy table. And John Dee developed this where they would hold scrying sessions. You can see there's a crystal ball on the top there, and they would hold scrying sessions with angels. And this became known as the angelic conversation, where John Dee learned Enochian, the angelic language, through angels speaking to him on behalf of God. So I was really interested in, this object and thinking about this object as this kind of spiritual communication device, like having this kind of mediated access to God, thinking about John Dee's history and how I've already taken him up and really kind of thought of him as like a proto Peter Thiel-like figure, in earlier works. So, the installation I've made, although of course it's changed and it's bigger, is very much kind of reimagining John Dee's Holy Table, or, kind of taking it as a historical point of influence and reference, where my work becomes like a kind of larger scale, like religious computational machine. And then, the other point is actually just working with artificial intelligence in different ways, to, kind of surface certain elements and dynamics that obviously come through building certain, intentional data sets that are pulling from different religious writings, political traditions, really trying to create the brew, I think, that each of these different gods, kind of needed to kind of materialize and come into language. Each god has 17 symbols, and these are the final symbols. And I worked with this graphic design studio in Berlin called Studio Pandan to basically take this massive repository of symbols that I'll show you next and basically create an aesthetic consistency across all of these gods, but then kind of hone in and try to give each god its own kind of unique symbolic language. First, we gathered different kind of security and surveillance company logos. But then we also went in and pulled out, different, like for instance, different kind of BDSM symbols, which is definitely kind of like a dynamic of desire that exists within Expositio's world. So, kind of pulling from all this stuff. Then we also went into Midjourney and created a whole set of different generated symbols, giving lots of different types of prompts that relate to the qualities of Expositio. And then that basically, this material goes to the graphic designers, and then we really start a back and forth process of using this as the material to start crafting the final set of symbols. And that's what we did with all of these different gods, right? This is Eudicium's set of generated symbols. And then, they start coming into computer graphics, and we start doing like all kinds of different, work, prepping them. The main computer graphics artist that I've been working with since 2017 is Harry Sanderson, who is London-based, incredible person. I feel like I'm in some really intense relationship with him because we work so intensely and closely together. But that kind of gives you a sense of, the path to symbol generation. And then if we come to text, similar way of working with the symbol generation. As you can see here, there are these training sets that were created. And you can see there's a training set for conjuring songs and sermons, which are kind of like, I don't know, almost like the control set that have like a massive, vast, array of like different conjuring songs across like religions, histories, locations. So for Expositio, for instance, it's kind of like, building a data set that's got some BDSM material. There is fiction and literature. Like here we have like, Anne Rice's erotic, part of her erotic trilogy, Beauty's Punishment, scholarship and writing on surveillance, different types of material on torture, TSA, airport screenings in the US. So you can see it's like really creating this like quite broad, like, I don't know, like witch's brew or something, a material that then all comes together when we do, AI generation. Anyway, after kind of doing all this text training, we get something like this. This is the invocation of Eternus. And, when we're first getting that output, you can see that there is a massive amount of material that gets generated, including, as you can see here, a long poem about blowjobs. And so it's just like, editing and editing and editing and getting things down. And then, in the end, Expositio's, let me see, where is it? Expositio's conjuring song, it shrinks down to something like this. But then, of course, once the text has been generated, then we move into the area of performance. With this, I had cast, as I mentioned, if I come back here, cast a set of people to actually play these prophets. And, I performed one of them. And basically the way we did this was using basically a motion capture, facial motion capture app that can be on your phone called Live Face Link, which is for Unreal. Let's say I go in here to Eudicium, which was performed by the artist Ricardo Dominguez, who lives in San Diego. Really, we're just getting this facial capture of Ricardo performing.
For the austere cemetery of the black bounding box to live as flesh only.
But so look, this is what the software does, right?
Out of the cauldron of annihilation, from inside the black bounding box of judgment, I come to answer your call. and share a prophetic formula. Everybody shall be judged.
We, take this performance, use obviously Ricardo's voice. We use the facial motion capture data. So Ricardo's face ends up turning into something like this. And, like highly abstract. But Ricardo's face is, driving this. Here, this will be.
Out of the cauldron of annihilation from inside the black bounding box of judgment, I come to answer your call.
So that's just an early test, but it just gives you a sense of this process, right? Of moving from the facial capture, going into the kind of then inhabiting this more abstract look of the prophets. Now, of course, how did we come up with these looks for these prophets? Well, we ended up working in this instance with stable diffusion and generated a whole bunch of different references for what these prophets could look like. This is variations on Eternus. This is expositio. This is eudicium, lacrimae. And we use these as the basis to start, visualizing what these prophets would look like. And I can show you, here is a finished, where is it? Let me see. It's going to be here. This is what the final version of eudicium looks like. So you can see it's similar, but there's like this skin that the prophet is wearing that kind of moves as it speaks. And we went through this with, all of the performers. And I can just show you like some more images within the computer graphics. I don't have to show you that whole kind of process again. But if we come into here, this is an early draft of what the prophet for lacrimae looks like, which is a teardrop crying. And then on this side here, you have these eyes that are closed that are also crying, and the material is glass. And here you have Eternus, which is who I played. And you have this kind of swirl of blood behind it and this like very kind of ornate, regal, princely like. And then we're currently finishing up expositio, but this is like a kind of close sense of what expositio is going to look like, which is something like a face that has this kind of latex like fabric pulled over it with these different knots that are going to be kind of holding it taut. Working this way, giving like acknowledgement to the crew and everyone that's worked on this. It's important to me, and it's strangely like a point of tension in art. Film always has credits at the end. And, I don't understand why that's often so complicated or a point of tension in art when you want to actually include credits with an installation. I guess I'm also just saying this because, so many artists actually work with numerous people to produce work, but that is not acknowledged or, some kind of shadow economy, and just have a different approach to it. I think I love the people I work with. I like to acknowledge them publicly and give them the credit that they deserve. And, I would rather take like a year or a year and a half and make one work than opposed to just making, a lot of little smaller things alone. It's just, I just get a lot more joy and pleasure working with a team like this. Obviously a big part of this work, it's about extraction, but it's also about complicity. I think that is something which is uncomfortable, but also not uncomfortable. Of course, like this kind of work, it really depends on the attention span you're bringing to it. So I think, there's an element of experiencing this, which would be kind of like wacky and probably feeling like somewhat extreme and overwhelming. But I'm also interested as an artist in like seduction. I like work that kind of like seduces and enfolds as a strategy of trying to get people to engage more deeply with the practice. Yeah, I want people to feel that the kind of like, depth and expansiveness of this AI religiosity. And of course it's a religiosity that goes beyond artificial intelligence. It's just kind of artificial intelligence is this current way of kind of expressing that dynamic in the work, but just to kind of feel the depth and breadth of it, but then also, feel like, I want people to feel implicated, that people are kind of caught up in this dynamic. The installation isn't just about staging this kind of like perfected system. It's really about staging this dynamic to show that it's very much, entangled in a political struggle, and that there's a contestation at work here with the kind of dynamics of religiosity and religious belief that the work is exploring. So, I'd like people to be able to feel that and get a sense of that in the work as well.